Officer Travis Parks shook his head as he looked at the fresh graffiti. Al Hall Green Man, said a particularly sloppy message in runny green paint. Praise the Pumpkin Child, said another in lurid orange, this one a little more coherent. Travis felt an impotent kind of rage burning in him as he saw it, realizing it would only be the beginning of this particular headache. So, you say you closed up shop around 9, and that this definitely wasn't there when you left? Travis asked Mr. Worley, the manager of the Pork Shaver General Store. Mr. Worley gave him a look that said he wanted to ask honestly if Travis's mother had any kids who'd lived, but thought better of it. Travis, despite being 28 and not as vested as some of his peers, was still an officer of the law, and in Frazier, that meant something. No, Travis, I believe I would have noticed graffiti on the front window of my store had it happened before closing. Travis poked his bottom lip out and nodded, making a note of it. Anyone you suspect might have been responsible for this? If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably Frank and Riley Cozy. They spray-painted curse words on the back of my store last year, and the year before that. This is a little different, though. Spelling is still atrocious, but the message is a little more cryptic than the usual anti-Semitic nonsense they hear from their father. Travis nodded, having conceded that. Even though Francis Worley was as much of a Baptist as anyone in town, the Frazier Police Department still got calls at least once a year about the usual graffiti on the building. Swastikas, anti-Semitic slurs, general hate speech, and some very creative ways to spell Israel were just a few of the things that Travis had seen painted on the building in the 5 years he'd been with the force. And Sheriff Carl claimed to have seen a portrait of the Fuhrer himself done on the loading bay one year, an image he suspected had been the work of the boy's father, Frank Sr. I'll go make inquiries, Mr. Worley, but you know their father will corroborate whatever story they put forward. Francis Worley just shrugged. Not sure why I pay taxes so my store can get vandalized every year. We both know full well that if I were to blow one of those boys away after catching him in the act, I'd be lucky to get a job selling commissary at the Stragview canteen counter, let alone walking around as a free man. Travis nodded, commiserating with the old man, but unable to do anything about it. Something caught his eye as he finished making notes, though, a corona of light from the other side of the street. Travis glanced over to the monstrosity that sat there. The new bank stuck out like a sore thumb in a historic town like Frazier. But the sun reflecting off the glass had given him an idea. Francis Worley might not be able to afford cameras, but the bank most certainly could. What were the chances that one of them might have seen the crime take place at the general store? Better than zero, that was for sure. Well, Mr. Worley, let me go check a few things. There might actually be a little something I can do, depending on what I can find. Mr. Worley seemed to have noticed what he was looking at, and smiled as he put two and two together. You mean that eyesore might actually be good for something? He asked, a smile creeping across his face. Well, will wonders never cease? Travis had once loved the Halloween season, but as he drove out of Frazier and into the sticks, he found that he wished it was already November 1st. This time of year was good for little else besides headaches, even in a town as small as Frazier. Most of the kids in town were farm kids from God-fearing families, but even they got up to a certain amount of helling. Usually it was little beyond busted-up jack-o'-lanterns and some vandalized Halloween decorations. But every now and again, some kid got a little too into the fun and set a barn on fire or broke some storefront windows. It was a headache for cops and business owners alike, but this was probably the worst of it. Travis had brought Sullivan with him, an older guy with some rapport with the farmers, but it wouldn't do a lot of good. It wouldn't matter if he got their kids on film, with their social security cards in hand even, stating their full name and admitting to the crime. Most parents would tell you it couldn't be their kids and that a mistake had been made. They would cry and beg, and then they'd bail their kids out when you eventually had to take them in. And the Comet would run a story about overzealous police forces and their mishandling of minors when November rolled around. Then, of course, there were parents like Frank Cozy. Frank was a retired Marine who'd fought in the early days of the War on Terror. He'd come back meaner and less personable after 4 years in the desert, and lived mostly off a disability check from the government after the transport truck he'd been doing maintenance on fell on his legs. They had saved all of the left one and most of the right, but from the knee down, the right was more metal and plastic than flesh. With the little money he had made from farming, it was no secret he was growing cow corn, as they called it, in his back field, and making moonshine in his cowshed. He supplemented the checks he made and had a bit of a comfy living. After his wife left him with the kids about 6 or 8 years ago, who could remember, he had just kind of sat out on the homestead and got less and less sociable. Less sociable and more angry about things that had no basis out here in the middle of nowhere. "Best you let me do the talking when we get there," Sullivan said, smiling at Travis to show it was nothing personal. "I've tipped a glass with him at the Veterans Hall from time to time, and he may be willing to hear me out." Travis nodded, but quite frankly, he didn't care if Frank Cozy heard them out or not. The bank across the street had been more than happy to show them their security tapes, and Travis had seen the pair roll up on their bikes at about 11:30, bags of spray paint hanging from the handlebars. They had been smart, wearing fluorescent orange masks that kind of looked like pumpkins, but the bikes were the same red beat-up Huffies that they had ridden since they could ride at all. They had sprayed the messages on the front of the glass and then pulled off, the whole process taking less than about 20 minutes. Travis had talked to Sheriff Carl about it and had gotten permission to bring the boys in, their father in tow, if need be. As they pulled into the yard, they could both see Frank sitting on the porch, as if expecting company. The red Huffies were parked beside said porch, both plainly the same ones in the video. To Travis's surprise, one of them still had the gray bag hanging off the handlebars, the contents heavy as they swung down. "Let me do the talking," Sullivan reiterated, climbing out as he greeted Frank warmly. Travis stepped out slowly, letting Sullivan get a few steps ahead before he moved to back him up. "What's this about?" Farmer Cozy asked, cutting Sullivan off in the middle of his pleasantries. "Well, Frank, we have reason to believe that your boys were involved in some helling last night about 11. We just want to ask them some questions so we can clear them up as suspects. Are they..." "They were here all night. They were both in bed by 9. Saw 'em myself." "No one's saying you didn't, Frank. All we're saying is, we got 'em on camera, Mr. Cozy," Travis said, already bored with the back and forth. "We can place them at the scene." "Is that a fact?" Frank Cozy asked. "Well, you must be mistaken. I done told you that." Yeah, we heard you, and we're telling you that we want them for questioning. Now you can either go get them, or we can go get them. Your choice." Frank opened his mouth to say something that would likely have put him in the back of the car with his brats, but he was saved a trip to the station when his oldest son came out on the porch. Frank Jr. was still wearing his jeans, the same jeans he'd worn the night before, complete with a green smear across one side, and Riley was standing in the doorway not far behind him, in a similar state. Even from here, Travis could see the orange specks on his hands, and they would likely find more in his nail beds if they looked. Frank Sr. gave his oldest a look, clearly not expecting him to be stupid enough to step outside. But if he noticed, Frank Jr. slowed not at all. "He told you what you wanted to know, so why don't you take yourself back to town?" Sullivan looked uncomfortable, the exchange clearly not going the way he'd expected. But Travis smiled knowingly as he pointed to the stain on the older boy's jeans. "What's that, then?" Frank Jr. looked indignant, clearly taking after his father when it came to talking to the law. But one look at his pants, and both generations of Frank clearly knew the jig was up. "Go on then, boy," Frank Sr. said. "You too, Riley. You made a balls up of it now, so you'll have to take your licks." "But Pa," Frank Jr. said, but his father waved a hand at him. "Go on now. Best be done with it. Maybe learn a little something from your stupidity so you don't go repeating it again." Travis had little doubt that the lesson was not to follow the rules of polite society, and was more likely to clean up after committing crimes next time. But it didn't matter much to him. As they climbed into the back of the car, Travis realized that he had gotten off easy, though maybe not as easy as he thought. "I ain't saying nothing," Frank Jr. said, and Travis was starting to lose some of his patience. They had both of them in the station's only interrogation room, but it seemed that neither of them was willing to elaborate on why they had spray-painted the messages. The sheriff didn't really care about the whys. He only really cared that they had sprayed the messages, and that now they would be made to answer for it. Both of them were minors, Riley barely in high school, but they could still be charged for vandalism, and for the previous vandalisms as well, if they played their cards right. The problem was that this didn't fit their usual pattern of vandalism, and Travis was worried that they couldn't make them stick. "We don't really need a statement, boys," he said, trying a different gambit. "We got the two of you on camera doing the crime. What we really were curious about was the message." "I ain't saying nothing," Frank Jr. reiterated for about the 100th time. Riley, however, looked like he might be getting a little tired of the game. "Look, if someone put you boys up to this, we just want to make sure they get in trouble too. You don't have to take all the blame for yourself." "I ain't saying..." "Frank, why don't we just tell him about the..." Riley cowered a little as Frank rounded on him, his eyes containing drops of fire as he dared him to go on. "Shut the hell up, Riley. We ain't saying nothing." "But he told us to do it. If we just tell him, then they..." Travis surged forward as Frank Jr. swung his hand at his younger brother, catching him by the wrist before he could backhand him. "None of that. If you two want to beat each other up, you can do it after you get out of here. Now, who told the both of you to do this?" He was looking at Riley as he asked, but it appeared his brother's outburst had cowed him. He sat shaking, not daring to look at his older brother, as the two sat in silence. "Fine," Travis said. "I guess it's just the two of you that can suffer then. The rough estimate on what you did is around $300 worth of damage to the general store. I'm guessing your daddy is good for it, so we can proceed with booking you, and you can wait for..." He stopped as someone knocked on the door to the little room. He told the boys to excuse him and stepped out to find Cheryl, the station's dispatcher, looking unsure of herself. "What's wrong? I'm in the middle of an interview," Travis asked. "Sheriff Carl said he's got another vandal coming in." Travis gave her a minute, waiting for her to explain, but when it seemed that nothing was forthcoming, he prompted her to continue. "So? It's another middle schooler. This one tagged the Legion Hall in the middle of the day." "So?" Travis prompted again, wanting to know what this had to do with him. "He tagged it with the same message as these two. The exact same message." Now Travis understood. This was a pattern, another perpetrator, claiming to have been moved by someone else, and they might be a little more receptive to talking than the cozy boys. If this was some orchestrated prank, Maybe Travis could nip it in the bud before it got out of hand. Tell him to bring the kid into the interview room. I'm about to make some room for him. Cheryl nodded and headed back to the desk, Travis turning back to the boys to give them the bad news. Well, looks like I don't need your statement after all. I guess you can both go back to holding. This fella coming in seems way more willing to cooperate. He won't talk, Riley said, taking Travis completely by surprise. He knows better than to cross the pumpkin. But Frank's hand made a meaty sound as it hit his brother's mouth. I told you to shut up, he yelled, reeling back for another one. Don't talk about nothing, you understand? Travis caught him before he could deal his brother another smack. He manhandled the larger of the cozy boys into a holding cell, the younger following behind him and looking thoroughly chastised. Travis put him in a different cell, as far from his volatile brother as possible, and went to set the room to rights. They had another guest coming, after all. You telling me that we're looking for a kid with a pumpkin for a head? Sheriff Carl Hashwin was looking skeptically at Travis's report, the buttons on his uniform straining a little at his gut. Sheriff Carl had been on the force for 20 years, had been the sheriff for 10 of those years, and Travis figured that he had seen a lot in that time. That being said, this was clearly new territory he was asked to plunge into. The man dealt with speeders, people who wrote bad checks, and the occasional act of petty theft. Vandals, led by an odd person in a carved pumpkin head, were something different. I'm sure what they meant was someone wearing a jack-o'-lantern, but that's the description I was given. The Wilby kid was more than happy to describe him for me. Apparently the kid assured him that he wouldn't get caught. I brought it to Riley Cozy, and the boy as good as identified him as the same kid who had asked he and his brother to vandalize the general store. Mark Wilby had been legitimately angry when Travis had met with him. Whoever this pumpkin-headed kid was, he was good at convincing people, because Mark had opened by saying that there was no way he could have been caught. The kid had assured him that he would be protected, and that his reward would be great after he left his message across the Legion Hall. So when Darrell Gribbs, the owner of the hall, had arrived to find him finishing up the last letter, he had called the cops and held him there until they arrived. Mark was on the football team, big even for a 13-year-old, but Darrell had been to Vietnam and was not about to let some pup ruin his place and get away with it. Thanks to Darrell and the persuasive nature of this jack-o'-lantern kid, they now had something to go by. Yeah, I don't know, Travis. This all just sounds like bullshit to me. How so? Travis asked, legitimately taken aback. Both kids identified this other kid, down to the headgear. Yeah, then they committed vandalism. Who cares about this pumpkin kid? We have the perpetrator. That's all I care about. And if he convinces more kids to do the same? Sheriff Carl shrugged. Then I hope their parents have some deep pockets too. It's just Halloween Helen, Travis. It happens every year. This is no different. Travis wanted to believe that, but somehow it didn't feel like the normal degree of pranks and tricks. This seems different, boss. This isn't the... He felt a strange sense of deja vu as someone interrupted him with a less than gentle knock. Sheriff, Sullivan said on the other side, you might want to see this. What is it, Sully? Carl asked, his brow knitting together a little as he came ponderously out of his chair. Come out front. It appears there's been another tagging. Travis followed behind the sheriff's ponderous gait, and the two of them discovered what Sullivan was talking about together. Someone had spray-painted "The Green Man Lives" across the front of the station in large, smeary green letters. As the three of them stood there, taking it all in, Travis saw some of the sheriff's ambivalence drain away. I want the camera footage from the front of the station on my desk as soon as possible. Travis, go ahead and put out an APB on this Pumpkinhead kid. If he's responsible for this crap, I want it to stop. This just became very personal. He waddled back in then and Travis sighed as he looked at the runny message that lay across the bricks of the small police station. He hated Halloween, but this year felt different. As the hair on the back of his neck prickled, Travis couldn't help but look around, expecting to see a little jack-o'-lantern hiding somewhere nearby. This year, it seemed, the tricks would come before the treats. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you still feel like you could do with a little more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that's appearing on your screen? If you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we put on here. I make new videos 7 days a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss a one of them. So if you'd like to support the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stuff we do here. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel in a more financial way, you could always become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Spooky Skeletons, that's my $5 members, always get their videos early, as opposed to in the evening. And we've got lots of other cool stuff that you can take advantage of. Just go down to Patreon and give it a look, or become a member on YouTube. Speaking of all of our wonderful patrons and YouTube members, let's go ahead and thank them right now. Thanks to Unicorn Hollow, our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to our Spooky Skeleton contributors, Janice, Lee Kendall, and Saikat. Thanks to our Ghostly Reader contributors, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. Again, if you'd like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, there are links below to Patreon, and you can just go to YouTube and click on membership, if that's something that interests you. There's also links to my latest book below if you'd like to go have a look on Amazon. It should show you the other books I've got as well, so why not go ahead and get the whole collection. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.